Indiana's Jalen Hood-Schifino might be the next smooth guard who's a lottery pick. This is Floor and Ceiling, let's break him down. At around 6'5" with a long 6'10" plus wingspan, Jalen Hood-Schifino could be this year's craftiest ball handler. The Indiana freshman projects as a master from the mid-range, converting on this type of shot, which is no doubt his go-to, both on high volume and high efficiency. So I think it's only right that we start there. Hood-Schifino converted on an awesome 42% of his two-point jumpers as a freshman, but it's more than that. The Indiana guard went to this shot more than half of the time, but defenses were powerless. They weren't able to figure out how to stop Hood-Schifino from cashing in on his mid-range jumper, even if he was almost always going to it. The 6'5" guard loves a screen going left, and he will take this side most of the time, but really Hood-Schifino can use either side of the floor. He's super comfortable operating around the high post and the free throw line, but one thing that he will absolutely need in the future is a great pick and roll partner. Hood-Schifino isn't really the type to ISO, he needs a screen more so, and at Indiana he had Trayce Jackson-Davis as his go-to screener, who defenses were deathly afraid of. JHS is already a really good shooter, but you also have to factor in all the things that Jackson-Davis could do upon screening. He could face up and shoot, catch and finish, playmake out of the short roll, and so on. So defenses were super concerned about their two-man game, and I think that this opened up some more windows in turn for Hood-Schifino. What I love the most from him is his patience. Jalen understands that he doesn't have to kill his dribble when the hedge or the blitz arrives. Rather, he's very skilled at keeping the ball alive and on a string with his very tight handle. From there, he can use an escape dribble, reset, and go. In all honesty, there's probably a case to be made for Hood-Schifino being the most lethal mid-range scorer in this draft, but much like in my last video about Bryce Sensabaugh, JHS runs the risk of being too reliant on this shot. In some ways, he already is, we'll dive into that later, but there's definitely a reason as to why Hood-Schifino takes so many mid-range Js, and it has to do with how he gets to his spots. The Indiana freshman took 212 two-point jumpers this season, which is just a massive amount that you're not really going to see elsewhere in this draft. Up until this point, Hood-Schifino has converted on these shots at an efficient clip on a large sample, so that's good and there's a chance that he could be an exception, but look around the NBA. Very few players, especially those early in their careers right now, are almost exclusively mid-range merchants. So when I'm looking ahead towards the future, I want to see what Hood-Schifino can do in isolation situations more often. Trayce Jackson-Davis was his release valve at Indiana, so to speak, whenever something went wrong, but I'm curious to see even more of Hood-Schifino as a self-creator without a ball screen in the middle. He has the handle and poise to chain moves, but I'm not sure that he has the athleticism to consistently create separation. Still, where that shows up most right now though is near the basket. There isn't really a way to sugarcoat this, but Hood-Schifino must make huge strides at the rim. The main thing is he barely gets there. As a freshman, he had a super low 4 dunks all year, and less than 20% of his total shots were at the basket. Jalen took only 80 attempts close to the hoop this season, which is incredibly underwhelming. He's crafty and quick-minded, but he's not exactly quick when it comes to foot speed. As an athlete, Hood-Schifino is average at best, and he depends much more on coordination, deceleration, and balance, not explosiveness. In turn, this limits his potential as a finisher, but I'm even more concerned about his generation at the rack before we even worry about his finishing. I've heard Hood-Schifino be compared to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, But keep in mind that in college, almost half of Shea's shots came at the rim. So despite some of the other similarities, that is night and day. To be fair, it's true that the paint and the post were reserved for Jackson Davis at Indiana, and Hood-Schifino had to share the floor with two bigs sometimes, so obviously that clogged up the lanes. But overall, I'm not impressed by his physicality or motor as a driver. The good news is, Hood-Schifino already does have a certain way to offset this major improvement point. The Indiana freshman is equipped with a floater or a runner that he puts to good use. Again, you'll mostly see Hood-Schifino going left here, and then he'll tend to swap back to his right for the touch shot after he pulls up off only 1 foot. JHS has nice size for a guard at over 6'5" in shoes, plus he has a nice frame with long arms as well as a tight handle, so I think he'll be able to get to this shot whenever he needs it. Right now, Hood-Schifino can do so off the dribble, but like with the other elements of his game, he's also highly adept using a pick. I found this make here really impressive over Zach Edey. And again, from this same game, I love how Hood-Schifino can freeze him out of the ball screen before getting into his floater. As for his driving game, there have been some flashes, but nothing to really read into because the sample size is so small. That's a little worrying for someone who's likely going to be one of your 2 main ball handlers, but I'm hoping that with more space available, less bigs in the way, and his skill set with his handle and touch, Hood-Schifino can improve near the basket. What we're seeing right now is not good enough. Delving into Hood-Schifino's playmaking, I'm very much convinced. He averaged less than 4 assists per game, which maybe doesn't leap off the page, but I think that undervalues how good of a passer JHS is. For me, he's one of the very best in this draft, with his reads of course, but what sets Hood-Schifino apart, I think, is his execution. It's worth noting again just how paced and composed he is using ball screens. For me, Jalen is making NBA level type reads on a college floor, and he's doing so in a way that very few other guards in his class do. Hood-Schifino is great at using his handle to beat or avoid help or traps, and then he uses the pressure that he generates to find others. At Indiana, his pick and roll partner most of the time was Tracy Jackson Davis, and they were very good together. Hood-Schifino can pass with his left hand, right hand, one hand, both hands, over the top, in the pocket, through defenders, really any way. He's an awesome facilitator with accuracy, with creativity, and I can't wait to watch him create for others in the NBA. As he steps into the league, I also expect that Hood-Schifino will be constantly creating threes for others. This was something that he already flashed at Indiana, but the personnel around him was not really up to par in terms of three-point shooting. In the NBA, looks like these probably end up in a wide open corner tray. Hood-Schifino can also pass in transition, where yet again, I think the nature of the pros might suit him a little better. The pace is going to be higher, better athletes are going to be sharing the floor with him, so Hood-Schifino will have plenty of opportunities in the open court. When he collects the ball off a miss, the Indiana freshman is both a quick and aggressive decision maker. In terms of turnovers, I'm not too worried. Hood-Schifino averaged about 1 more assist than turnover in college. Jalen has some careless passes from time to time, and he will have to cut down on those, but I think you can really say the same for the vast majority of college guards. On top of that, I also think that there was a huge focus on him spoon-feeding Tracy Jackson Davis down low, which could get predictable and picked off. Instead, a big thing for him, like with the improvements as a finisher, will be to play better in reduced spaces, as well as through multiple bodies. I want to close out Hood-Schifino's offense by discussing his three. It's a mixed bag right now, and I think it's too early to come to conclusions. One big factor is that all the indicators point towards him being a pretty good shooter. Hood-Schifino has very real touch from two, from the free throw line is okay too, even if he barely gets there, and we've seen some flashes from the perimeter, creating his own triple off the bounce. At the same time though, I do think that Hood-Schifino should also probably take more threes. He had 111 attempts all season, which does seem like a lot, but you have to remember that he doesn't take any shots at the rim virtually. And then he'll also have to make these threes at a higher clip. As a freshman, Hood-Schifino shot 33% from deep, which must go up. And I'm also going to want to see him be a more consistent shooter out of spot-ups. He didn't take too many at Indiana, but I think that this is a shot that he'll see more of going forward. In theory, everything's there for him to make it, but it just hasn't really happened over a sustained period yet. Still, when it comes to the shot, I'm definitely buying in on Hood-Schifino. Jalen Hood-Schifino is a so-so defender down the other end of the floor. Positionally, I think he's fine, and some of this might honestly go back to his tools. Hood-Schifino has solid size for a guard at over 6'5" in shoes, and his wingspan, which stretches to over 6'10", definitely gives him at least some switchability. I don't expect Jalen to defend wings or forwards in the NBA, but I definitely feel like you will want to see him check big twos and small threes. In college at Indiana, he did an alright job on most primary ball handlers, but I don't think that he was tested too much. Still, if he's engaged, then I think Hood-Schifino will hold up fine on this side of the floor. I don't know if he'll be a positive per se, but I think there's plenty of pathways to the Indiana man being a neutral or at least passable defender. What concerns me the most about him on this side of the ball really is the athleticism. We touched on a lot of this when it came to his finishing, but it shows up here as well. Outside of his actual physical dimensions, Hood-Schifino is average at best athletically. He's not slow, but he's not fast. And he's not weak, but he's not strong either. JHS lacks foot speed like we touched on, so combine that with everything else, and what you really end up with is that he lacks margin for recovery. Sure, Hood-Schifino will have some off-ball lapses, and he'll have to cut down on his ball watching, but that's not unusual for a prospect his age. However, in those times where Jalen concedes a blow-by, he just has no way to get back into the play. Unlike other players who are better athletes but maybe worse technically when it comes to skills, there's just no chance for Hood-Schifino to recover. Whenever this happened at Indiana, he had somewhat of a safety blanket because there were usually one or two guys at the rim to make up for him. But that's a contextual thing, and the tools and scheme would need to be there for that in the NBA. So going ahead, I want to see how Hood-Schifino does against NBA guards, and I'm also going to want to see how he fares off when there's bigger responsibilities placed on him on this side of the ball. Jalen Hood-Schifino is one of the most interesting evaluations in this draft. There isn't really anybody else with his statistical profile. I think that he is a very, very good shooter, potentially incredible, but to be fair, he's only taking mid-range twos. 33% from deep isn't great. I think he's better than that, but most of all, what Hood-Schifino does have to change is his finishing. He doesn't get to the rim, he doesn't finish at the rim, he doesn't really even get into the paint that much, and in the NBA, for somebody who could potentially be a lead guard, who's already, I think, a very good shooter and a great playmaker, that will be the biggest improvement point. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a comment telling me what you think of Jalen Hood-Schifino, and as always, if you want to watch more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Take care, and I'll catch you guys next time.